Hi, my name is Joe. At first glance, I might look like a normal person, but I've spent over a year lost in the wild, constantly preparing my mind, soul, and body for this exact moment.
My body is ready.
To all the hardships I've overcome, it is finally time to face the ultimate question.
Is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild really a 10 out of 10 game? The answer might surprise you. Or maybe not.
Should you play The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild? Well, to answer that question, you first need to answer 4 very specific questions yourself. Do you have a Nintendo Switch? Do you like games? And do you want to play it? If you answered yes to any of those questions, then I will highly recommend giving it a try.
Thank you all for joining me on this journey. I'll see you next time. Wait, what? You're not convinced yet?
The Legend of Zelda is one of Nintendo's biggest franchises, right next to the Wii series, Digimon, and Luigi's brother. The first Legend of Zelda game was released on the Famicom in Japan in 1986 and made its way to the Western markets on the NES more than a year later in 1987. I was too young to play it at the time, due to not being born yet, but in my teenage years, I got an opportunity to play the PC port of the game, and after a few minutes of playing, I knew something for certain.
I have no idea what I'm doing.
This game was bigger and more complex than my Ice Climber, Pokemon and Final Fantasy loving brain could understand at the time. It seemed fun and interesting, but not having any sense of direction made me angsty and I did not enjoy the experience that much. It wasn't until recently when I started replaying it on The Legend of Zelda Game & Watch that I realized how awesome the original game really is, offering an open world experience unlike other games from its time, and ultimately led to Breath of the Wild. Growing up, I tried some Legend of Zelda games on the Game Boy Advance and the DS, but I never finished those because I got lost and gave up, and the other games were on the DS with crappy controls. I still kept my eyes on the franchise, admiring the games, but due to not being released on a PlayStation console, I never got the chance to play them outside of their PC ports. Then near the end of 2017, my older brother told me to try Breath of the Wild on his fancy new console called the Nintendo Switch. I was hesitant at first, as I was not ready to get hurt again, like I was with the PlayStation Vita, but I gave it a try anyway, and needless to say, I was blown away.
Whoa, so that's a blowjob.
From the very first breath I took after I stepped outside the opening shrine and saw the beautifully crafted huge open world, I was intrigued by it. I've been a big fan of open world games since Grand Theft Auto 3, and most of my favorite gaming experiences growing up were open world games. I love seeing how the genre evolves, giving us bigger and better worlds that we can explore and get lost in. Being let free in this world, I could immediately feel that this was going to be different compared to the other Legend of Zelda games I have played or seen before. Imagine my excitement when I discovered that climbing does not only extend to ledges, but almost anything in the world. The realization that I could actually go anywhere I see without having to jump in weird spots or launch my horse into space changed everything for me.
I became a man.
As soon as I got a glimpse of Hyrule, I wanted to see what lies beyond the mountains in the distance, and between the trees of the forests. I wanted to scale the mountains that are split in half and push this rock into the old man. Unfortunately, the rock changed course and never hit him, but I was excited about it until that part. Breath of the Wild has a gorgeous looking world with many of the locations offering breathtaking views. While other open world games give you markers on the map to show you where you need to go to have fun, Breath of the Wild instead offers a world that you want to explore, to discover all the secrets there are. It offers freedom which very few other games have done this well. While other games might be like, nah, there's a tree here, you can't go that way. Breath of the Wild offers you a range of ways to overcome it. You can walk around it, jump over it, blow it up with bombs, wait for it to get hit by lightning, or you can even chop up that tree, make a fire, bake yourself some apples, and move forward with your life. Instead of having a linear story like most other games, you get to explore the world however you want, at your own pace, which is part of the game's charm. My first 2 playthroughs of a game were focused on finishing the storyline, but once I had my fill with the story, I retired to become an explorer, trying to discover every secret I could find. I filled up my stamina wheel, while ignoring my heart, and just started exploring the world without caring about any of the main story missions. I instead started looking for Korok while trying to fill up my compendium using the camera ability. Every time I found something new to take a picture of, it became fun to try and see if I could get a good shot of the animal or enemy before it rushed or killed me. Hundreds of hours later, I still find ways to enjoy the world and the challenges it throws at me. Probably because the world was so well crafted. Every mountain and ledge feels like they were intentionally put there. Some places are easy to get to, while others require you to prep for the journey. While the destination is ultimately up to you, the world still manages to make the journey interesting by having obstacles in your way, sometimes making it feel like traversing the world is a puzzle on its own. The beauty of it all is that the world is so filled with different things to find and conquer that you might be heading in one direction, but then spot something in the distance that draws your attention.
Ooh, I think I see an ice cream van.
And then hours later, you find yourself on a completely different adventure than your initial intended adventure, discovering dragons and mushroom trees.
Where the f*** am I?
The environments are interesting and beautiful, making them fun to explore. There are fields of grass that you can mow in search of insects, mushroom-filled forests that you can chop down to start a fire, deserts filled with ruins and very little food, frozen mountains where you can make giant snowballs, a volcano where you can have a spicy barbecue, and even beaches where you can go for a stroll and have thought-provoking moments.
Maybe Superhero Fight Club Reloaded isn't that bad. Nah, it definitely sucks.
There are different environmental and weather conditions that can affect you during your journey, such as cold environments that will require you to heat up in some way, be it using campfires, cooking hot food, carrying fire weapons, or dressing warm. There are warm environments requiring you to find shade, carry ice weapons, or dress cool in order to survive being cooked by the sun. Some environments even get so warm that your wooden weapons and shields start to catch fire, and ultimately even you, if you're ill prepared, giving you a whole new set of challenges to deal with. You constantly need to be on the lookout to gather resources in order to help you overcome these obstacles. The sun can affect how warm or cold an area is, and rain is always a bitch to deal with, making it extra tricky to traverse the world as you constantly slide while climbing. Thunder can make your day even worse by striking you if you have metal items equipped, or even sometimes if you don't.
It doesn't care about your feelings.
The game has a vast space to explore, and part of what I love about the game is that no matter which direction you decide to head in, you'll end up on the right path towards something. Sometimes you might discover a Korok, or cool weapons, or some useful items. Other times you might find a village or an enemy camp, and sometimes you might just find a cool mountain to slide down using your shield. It always felt like I was progressing towards something. Even when I just mess around in the game, I would end up finding some resources to upgrade my armor, or find new Korok under a stone, allowing me to upgrade my weapon slots. It has been one of the most fun gaming worlds I've explored, and even after tons of hours, I still love going to new parts of the map to discover new things. Besides having a world that looks magical, one of the things that ties it all together is the music in the game. The game might not have a big soundtrack playing the whole time, or many memorable songs, but it is part of the game's charm. Sometimes the music is lively depending on where you are, but other times it is subtle with just a few piano keys playing, but often go silent to amplify the environmental noises, such as the wind blowing or flowing rivers. It really helps to bring home the idea that it is you against the world, instead of being constantly pumped with good tunes that soon become repetitive. It creates moments of peace that I really enjoy after a hectic day, but it doesn't just end there. Other times you find yourself in tougher situations, and the music picks up to match the situation, such as when a guardian spots you, and it can make you go into a panic, before disappearing back into a calming silence after you either dealt with the threat or ran away. being as fun as it is, Breath of the Wild isn't without its flaws. In fact, it is a very broken game. As with most bigger games, there is popping to be expected, but it is never so bad that it takes away from the overall experience. When I look into the distance, it still looks like a place I want to go and explore, as opposed to feeling like an empty area. When things get a little more demanding for the Nintendo Switch, such as when you're exploring villages with lots of characters in them, or when multiple explosions go off at the same time, or when you play in docked mode, there can be a slight dip in frame rate, but at no point did I feel that it hurt my experience, or that it caused problems in combat. Things always felt fair, and as if I was in control. Speaking of combat, one of the most criticized issues of the game is the weapon durability. Finding a cool weapon only for it to break a few hits later can be disheartening.
Man, this is some bullshit.
But I can also see why this was done in the first place. If you could pick up a single strong weapon and use it throughout the whole game, then everyone will be flocking towards a single area at the start, and it will take away from the reason to explore to find new items, gear, and weapons to use to clear the next obstacle in your way. It adds a loop where you constantly need to be on the lookout for better weapons, so that you're ready for any combat situation you might end up finding yourself in. Although I can agree that the durability of weapons is set way too low, I would rather have it this way than find one weapon that ultimately makes me overpowered for the rest of the game and takes away my reason to approach combat situations with caution. The world offers an array of interesting and unique looking weapons that you can utilize on your journey, but they have however been reduced to only 4 different fighting styles. There are bows, one-handed weapons, two-handed weapons, and spears. Some have extra abilities such as freezing or shocking enemies, but they all tend to attack according to one of the 4 fighting styles. This might sound restricting, but it hasn't stopped people from creating some sick battle tactics. Besides it having limitations that players sometimes break, the overall combat is still fun and feels fair if you manage to get your attack timing right. Your weapons have their normal attacks, as well as charged attacks. One-handed weapons make you give a quick spin attack when charged. Two-handed weapons make you spin continuously until you run out of stamina. Spears can release a fury of attacks, and all 3 of these weapon types can be thrown at enemies.
Ayya!
If you jump or fall from high enough, you can slow down time to take aim and get the perfect shot with a bow. Bows also sometimes vary in the way that they work. Apart from your normal bows, some also have the ability to shoot multiple arrows at once, and others are able to shoot more accurately at further distances. You can use your shield to parry attacks and even reflect freaking laser beams. There are also additional abilities such as bombs you can use to fly, magnesis you can use to pick up metal objects and beat enemies with, stasis that you can use to stop and launch items at enemies, ice pillars that are cool, and a camera which is also nice, but useless in combat.
But still nice. Smile.
There are fewer enemy variations in this game than most Legend of Zelda games before it, and it can get a bit stale seeing the same enemy in different colors over and over. But at least they didn't fill it with weird boop chicken monsters. There are just enough different situations you can find yourself to keep things interesting. Enemies can carry different weapons with slight variations in combat styles, and the combat was crafted well enough to keep fights engaging. Sure, I agree that it would have been nice to have another handful of enemies in the game with different fighting styles, but I would rather have a handful of well-crafted enemies that interact with the world and fight the way that the enemies in this game do, as opposed to having 100 more enemies that end up feeling as unpolished as a Game Freak game.
Here's an example.
There are still some glitches that remain in the game, from blowing yourself across a map using bombs, to item duplication, to turning into Peter Pan. But luckily, you hardly run into these glitches unless you actively try to exploit them, which can be fun on its own. I feel that the only time glitches are really bad is when they hinder a player's progression, or affect the gameplay negatively without proper consent from the player. But most glitches in Breath of the Wild can be used to the player's benefit, allowing them to be exploited for some awesome combat moments, such as launching off enemies using your shield and flying across Hyrule to speedrun the game.
Which is why I rather think of them as hidden features as opposed to glitches. Now that's smart.
In the past, Legend of Zelda games would have a few bigger dungeons that were usually well thought out to challenge the player, using what they've learned and acquired up till then. In Breath of the Wild, there are over 120 shrines that serve as mini dungeons, that often contain a puzzle to open, a puzzle inside, or a strong enemy to take down. Since these shrines are usually discoverable in any order, their puzzles don't really build on each other that much. Besides 2 shrines that contain the answer to each other, the rest usually have their own self-contained challenges that require the abilities you got during the opening of a game, or weapons you have found. Some shrines have quite well-designed puzzles and challenges, while others are boring. There are also 4 bigger dungeons in the form of Divine Beast, but even these are small in comparison to the dungeons in previous games, and are over quite quickly if you know what you're doing. I for one understand the appeal for bigger dungeons that have a ton of puzzles and challenges put together, but I also get why Breath of the Wild went with the smaller shrines instead of bigger dungeons. If I had to constantly leave the open world I was exploring and spend hours at a time in a smaller cramped dungeon, I would quickly start missing the open world aspect and the freedom of the game, which made me fall in love with it in the first place.
Don't tell my wife.
The game might have its issues, but once you start exploring and get the hang of things, all these problems start melting away, and what you're left with in the end is something quite special. Breath of the Wild was the first time I fully dived into a Legend of Zelda game and got so hooked that I finished it without losing interest. It was the game that convinced me to get a Nintendo Switch of my own, and to dive back into all the Nintendo games I haven't experienced before, or haven't played in years. In the end, I'm glad that my brother gave me a chance to try this game more than 6 years ago, as it became one of my favorites of all time. Looking at all these things together, all the ups and downs, is Breath of the Wild truly a game that deserves a 10 out of 10 rating?
On paper, it might not technically be a 10 out of 10 game, but in my heart, it definitely is.